To be born wealthy in America was to inherit not just money but a script, one written by society's expectations, family obligations, and the weight of names that appeared in newspapers before their bearers could walk. Indeed, the daughters of industrial titans and financial kings lived their lives as public property, their engagements announced in society columns, their wardrobes scrutinized by strangers, their every move monitored by a press that had discovered that wealth made for compelling theatre. And yet the tragedies that would soon befall them revealed uncomfortable truths about the price of prominence and the particular burdens carried by those whose inheritances came with invisible chains. Yes, they lived in a world where wealth amplified everything: opportunity and danger, love and exploitation, hope and despair, until the very forces that elevated them ultimately consumed them. Today, we examine how fortune's most favoured daughters became victims of the very system that had promised to protect them, and how their stories illuminate the darker truths about American wealth and power. Imagine what it would feel like to be a Gilded Age heiress, your very movements choreographed by centuries of social expectation. For Dorothy Arnold, each day began with the weight of the Arnold name, a name that opened every door in Manhattan society, while simultaneously closing others. Her life was a parade of exquisite moments: shopping expeditions down Fifth Avenue, literary pursuits at prestigious schools, and secret romantic correspondences to suitors delivered on expensive stationery. Indeed, she played her part perfectly, floating through high society in velvet hats adorned with silk roses, her black fox muff keeping her gloved hands warm as she stepped into luxury shops where even the air seemed perfumed with privilege. Yet beneath this carefully maintained facade of wealth and propriety lay the stirrings of rebellion, of dreams that couldn't be bought, dreams that would lead her toward a destiny no one could have predicted on that fateful December afternoon in 1910. In today's episode, we'll share the enduring mystery of her disappearance, from the facts of the case to the wildest of theories, as we describe. The Gilded Age heiress who disappeared, the mystery of Dorothy Arnold. In the grand mansions of Gilded Age New York, where gaslight cast long shadows across marble floors and secrets whispered behind silk fans, Dorothy Arnold was born into a world where everything had its price, but true freedom remained beyond purchase. The second of 4 children, she emerged into life on the 1st of July 1885, destined to bear the weight of the Arnold name, a name that opened every door in Manhattan society, yet somehow managed to close just as many around her. And her father, Francis Arnold, had built his fortune on the delicate scents of imported perfumes, those invisible tendrils of luxury that wrapped themselves around the necks of society's finest ladies. From his offices at F.R. Arnold & Co., he crafted not merely a business, but a dynasty, one that reached its marble-clad fingers all the way to the Supreme Court through Dorothy's aunt's marriage to Justice Rufus W. Peckham. In fact, the Arnolds could trace their blood back to the Mayflower itself, old money mixing with new in that peculiarly American alchemy that defined the age. And the family mansion at 108 East 79th Street stood as a monument to their ascension, its rooms filled with the heavy breath of wealth, mahogany panels that had crossed oceans to line their walls, Persian carpets that muffled the sound of servants' footsteps, crystal chandeliers that caught and multiplied the light until it seemed the very air sparkled with privilege. Yet within these gilded walls, Dorothy felt the increasing weight of expectations pressing against her chest like a too-tight corset. At the Veltin School for Girls, she learned to move through society like a queen, her chin held at precisely the right angle to suggest both breeding and approachability. And at Bryn Mawr, she dared to dream of something more. Literature and language opened doors to worlds beyond the suffocating parlours of Fifth Avenue. She began to write, pouring her soul onto paper in secret moments between social obligations. But when her stories returned with rejection letters, her family's amusement cut deeper than any editor's criticism. Still, she persisted. In the autumn of 1910, Dorothy began spending more time alone, making mysterious trips downtown. Her father's refusal to let her move to Greenwich Village, that bohemian refuge of artists and intellectuals, only strengthened her resolve. No one who saw her on a crisp December day shortly thereafter could have known that, as she walked away from a candy shop, each click of her heels on the sidewalk was counting down to one of the most baffling disappearances in New York history. The morning of the 12th of December 1910 dawned cold and clear in Manhattan, the kind of crystalline winter day when footsteps echo sharply off brownstone facades and even the air seems to hold its breath. Dorothy Arnold emerged from the family mansion at 108 East 79th Street, wearing a tailored blue suit that whispered of wealth with every movement. Her black velvet hat, adorned with silk roses the colour of twilight, cast delicate shadows across her face, shadows that would soon become permanent in the photographs plastered across newspapers nationwide. In her leather purse lay $25 in crisp bills, a fortune to most at the time, but mere pocket money to an Arnold. The money nestled beside a letter, its contents known only to Dorothy, the paper worn at its creases from repeated reading. This was not the first such letter. Others had arrived over the preceding months, each one bearing a Boston postmark and the distinctive handwriting of George Griscom Jr., whose very name made Francis Arnold's jaw tighten with disapproval. The streets of Manhattan stretched before her that morning like the chapters of an unwritten novel. Fifth Avenue glittered with promise, its shop windows displaying treasures that Dorothy barely noticed as she made her way south. At Park and Tilford, she purchased a box of chocolates, the kind she had always favoured, wrapped in paper that crinkled with elegant restraint. The sound would echo in the memory of the shop girl who served her, becoming part of the tapestry of last moments that investigators would later weave together. At Brentano's bookstore, the warmth of literary sanctuary embraced her. Here, among the leather-bound volumes and fresh ink, Dorothy selected engaged girl sketches, a choice that would later be dissected for hidden meaning by dozens of detectives. The book's pages held stories of love and marriage, subjects that had become increasingly complicated in Dorothy's own life since her secret meetings with Griscom in Boston. As she left the bookstore, Manhattan's winter light was already beginning to fade, though it was not yet afternoon. Dorothy's figure, elegant in blue, merged with the crowd of holiday shoppers. She moved toward Central Park, where bare trees reached toward a steel-grey sky like grasping fingers. The park's winding paths offered silent witness to countless clandestine meetings and whispered promises, but whatever secrets they might have held about Dorothy's fate remained locked in winter's frozen embrace. Back at the mansion, the hours began their inexorable march toward evening. The family's dinner hour approached with its usual precision, silver being laid, wine being decanted, servants moving with practiced efficiency through rooms growing steadily darker. But Dorothy's chair would remain empty, her absence at first a mere ripple in the carefully orchestrated rhythm of upper-class life. That ripple would soon become a wave, threatening to overwhelm the carefully constructed facade of Arnold family propriety. For as the evening shadows lengthened across Fifth Avenue's fashionable flagstones, Dorothy Arnold, heiress, aspiring writer, secret romantic, had already stepped into a mystery that would haunt New York society for generations to come. For 6 weeks after Dorothy Arnold vanished, silence wrapped itself around the Arnold mansion like winter fog. Behind heavy curtains and massive oak doors, the family's private agony played out in whispered conversations and furtive meetings with John S. Keith, their trusted lawyer, whose discreet inquiries had yielded nothing but shadows. The family's pride, that great fortress built of old money and older connections, had become their prison. Francis Arnold, who had built an empire on imported perfumes and social connections, found himself facing an enemy that neither wealth nor influence could defeat. Each morning he descended the mansion's marble staircase with ever greyer features, the weight of his decision to protect the family name bearing down upon him with the inexorable force of approaching disaster. The servants moved through the house like ghosts, careful to avert their eyes from empty chairs and untouched place settings. Mary Martha Arnold maintained her social calendar with mechanical precision, each tea party and charity meeting a masterclass in composed desperation. Behind her perfect smile lay the growing certainty that every passing hour without police involvement pushed her daughter further beyond reach. Yet the spectre of scandal, that great destroyer of Gilded Age fortunes, kept her lips sealed and her gloved hands folded properly in her lap. When they finally broke their silence on the 25th of January 1911, the press descended like vultures on fresh prey. The Arnold mansion became the epicenter of a media earthquake that sent shockwaves through every drawing room from Fifth Avenue to Newport. Reporters prowled the sidewalks, their pencils sharp as knives, ready to carve the family's reputation into headlines that would sell papers from coast to coast. The press conference, held in the very parlour where Dorothy had last bid goodbye to her mother, transformed their private nightmare into public theatre. Francis Arnold stood before the flashbulbs, his dignity crumbling like ancient marble as he offered $1,000 for information about his daughter's whereabouts, a sum that seemed paltry against the $100,000 he would eventually spend chasing shadows. Across the nation, Dorothy's face stared out from newspaper pages and police circulars, her story feeding America's growing appetite for mystery and tragedy among the privileged classes. From Philadelphia's railway stations to San Antonio's dusty streets, reported sightings bloomed like desert flowers after rain, beautiful, brief, and ultimately false. The Pinkerton detectives, those shadows among shadows, followed countless leads that dissolved into nothing. Ransom notes arrived, each one raising hopes only to dash them against the rocks of deception. Even Joseph P.K. Leonard's lurid confession of witnessing Dorothy's demise proved to be nothing more than the fabrication of a desperate mind. But perhaps most telling was what remained in Dorothy's room, untouched since that December morning. Her evening clothes, her jewellery, her diary filled with secrets about George Griscom Jr., all the precious detritus of a life interrupted. And there on her writing desk lay a half-finished manuscript, its pages forever waiting for an ending that would never come. Time moves forward with relentless precision, but some mysteries refuse to fade into history's shadows. In the decades following Dorothy Arnold's disappearance, theories bloomed like dark flowers in the garden of public imagination, each one reaching toward its own version of truth. The ransom notes arrived like poison pen letters, demanding $5,000 for Dorothy's return, a paltry sum for an Arnold, yet still too much for truth. These missives, scrawled by opportunists who sought to profit from a family's desperation, only deepened the mystery they pretended to solve. Each fraudulent demand drove another nail into the coffin of the kidnapping theory, until it lay buried beneath the weight of its own improbability. In the marble-floored parlours of New York society, whispers of suicide drifted like perfume through the air. Those who knew Dorothy spoke of her rejected manuscripts, those paper children she had sent into the world only to have them return unwanted. They mentioned the weight of expectations that had pressed upon her shoulders, heavier than any fur coat she had ever worn. Some pointed to her letters to George Griscom Jr., where disappointment bled through the ink, like a wound that wouldn't heal. Griscom himself became both suspect and theorist, his week with Dorothy in Boston, a chapter that society matrons read between the lines with raised eyebrows and knowing glances. He spoke of her despondency over her failed literary ambitions, of dark hints in her correspondence that suggested an ending she might have written herself. Yet no body was ever found in Central Park's winter bare landscape. No unidentified woman matched her description in any of Manhattan's morgues. The elopement theory gained traction in certain circles, fueled by Dorothy's secret Boston rendezvous and her family's iron-fisted control over her life. Some imagined her on a steamer bound for Europe, her tailored blue suit exchanged for a new identity, her black fox muff traded for the warm embrace of freedom. But this romantic notion, like all the others, dissolved under the harsh light of investigation. As the years passed, Dorothy Arnold's disappearance became more than just another society scandal. It emerged as a dark mirror reflecting the anxieties of an age. In her story, the public found every fear that haunted the Gilded Age: the vulnerability of wealth, the price of rebellion against social constraints, the thin veneer of security that separated the highest echelons of society from the abyss of uncertainty. Francis Arnold went to his grave in 1922, believing his daughter had ended her own life, taking with him whatever secrets he might have held about those 6 weeks of silence. Mary Martha Arnold followed in 1928, her final years marked by the daily ritual of watching her front door, waiting for a return that never came. The case files gathered dust in police archives, their pages yellowing like autumn leaves. Yet Dorothy Arnold's disappearance refused to be relegated to history's footnotes. Her story continues to whisper through time, a reminder that even in an age when wealth could buy almost anything, Some questions remained forever beyond purchase, some mysteries eternally unsolved. When you think of tragic romances, Romeo and Juliet have nothing on Catherine Tylney Long, the teenage heiress whose fortune could have purchased Verona outright, with enough left over for a summer palace in Venice. Newspapers breathlessly tracked the Wiltshire heiress, as though reporting on a walking national treasury, which effectively she was. Catherine's inheritance was a financial supernova that warped the social fabric of Regency England, creating gravitational forces that pulled every debt-riddled aristocrat into her orbit, and making her the target of fortune-hunting missiles disguised as gentlemen, all launching themselves toward her with mathematical precision. London satirists published merciless caricatures of her suitor parade with titles like The Disconsolate Sailor or Miss Longing for a Pole, unwittingly prophesying the very man whose predatory talents would eventually convert her astronomical wealth into astronomical debt. Her story is a Regency horror story that ended up changing British law forever. In today's episode of Old Money Allure, we explore how the greatest fortune in Georgian England attracted the worst possible husband, a matrimonial predator whose talents for financial destruction would turn Catherine's fairy tale into a nightmare, leaving behind legal precedents that still protect vulnerable spouses centuries later. At 16, Catherine Tylney Long inherited a fortune so staggering it sent dukes swooning, earls salivating, and royalty itself calculating the most expedient path to her boudoir. Her inheritance sprawled across 25,000 acres in 6 English counties, encompassing several palatial homes, including Wanstead House, dubbed England's Versailles, alongside financial investments worth £300,000, approximately 30 million in today's currency. The annual income from her properties alone, £40,000, quadrupled what Jane Austen considered fabulously wealthy in Mr. Darcy, allowing Catherine to purchase multiple fictional romantic heroes before breakfast, while still affording a diamond tiara for afternoon tea. Each appearance of the Wiltshire heiress in London society prompted something resembling a wildlife documentary, herds of bachelor mammals charging wildly toward her carriage, while newspapers breathlessly reported on the feeding frenzy. Even the Duke of Clarence, future King William IV, joined this matrimonial stampede, despite his amphibian features, mountainous gambling debts, and inconvenient collection of 10 illegitimate royal offspring already supported at taxpayer expense. Catherine's rejection of this future monarch revealed either remarkable independence or simply functioning vision, creating the unprecedented spectacle of a commoner turning down a crown, albeit one perched atop a particularly unappealing royal head. London satirists feasted on her suitor parade, publishing merciless caricatures with titles like The Disconsolate Sailor or Miss Longing for a Pole, unwittingly prophesying the man whose predatory talents would eventually harpoon both her fortune and her life. When she finally chose William Wellesley Pole at 21, the Duke of Wellington's deceptively charming nephew, society momentarily believed in fairy tales, not recognising that beneath his captivating exterior lurked financial appetites that would humble a fleet of pirate ships. Their 1812 wedding dazzled London, with Catherine adorned in 700 guinea Brussels lace and diamonds worth 5 million modern pounds. Treasures that would soon vanish as her husband's compulsive spending devoured her wealth with locust-like efficiency. William eagerly assumed Catherine's surnames, transforming himself into the absurdly hyphenated William Pole Tylney Long Wellesley, while forgetting the wedding ring at the ceremony, the first red flag waving frantically among a sea of champagne fountains and aristocratic congratulations. As Britain's original celebrity power couple, their appearances dominated Regency social pages, creating a template for public fascination with wealthy couples that modern tabloids still follow with considerably less eloquent language and infinitely worse hats. Behind their mansion doors, William revealed his authentic nature, hosting ruinously expensive parties, redecorating with the restraint of a megalomaniacal peacock, and systematically converting Catherine's inheritance into an impressive collection of creditors. Within 10 years, the world's wealthiest heiress found herself fleeing across the English Channel to escape debtors, her vast fortune transformed into equally vast liabilities through her husband's specialised talent for financial immolation. Wanstead House, the architectural crown jewel that had cost nearly £400,000 to build, ended up dismantled and sold piecemeal for a mere £10,000, the physical manifestation of Catherine's fortune crumbling literally to dust. Her spectacular wealth, which briefly elevated her above nearly everyone in England, ultimately attracted precisely the wrong person, a matrimonial predator brilliantly disguised as Prince Charming, whose specialised talents included transforming fortunes into footnotes and heiresses into cautionary tales. Yet perhaps the most bitter irony lay not in how Catherine's fortune disappeared, but in how it appeared in the first place, a legacy built on foundations so morally dubious that its eventual collapse seemed less like misfortune and more like historical reckoning. The vast wealth that eventually crushed Catherine wasn't amassed through virtue. It was methodically assembled by ancestors who approached opportunity with the delicacy of colonial pirates and the ethics of particularly ambitious tax attorneys. Her great-great-grandfather Josiah Child transformed himself from London brewer to East India Company governor in 1673, monopolising Asian trade through practices that modern corporate ethics committees would classify somewhere between absolutely horrifying and potentially criminal. When Josiah purchased Wanstead in Essex, he established the family among England's landed elite, that curious class who diligently pretended their fortunes materialised from properly managed soil rather than colonial exploitation, cutthroat business tactics and strategic marriage certificates. His son Richard elevated the family further by wedding heiress Dorothy Glynn, absorbing the substantial Tylney, Hampshire estates, and initiating a multi-generational strategy of marrying money that Catherine's future husband would eventually perfect from the opposite direction. The final piece of the family's geographic monopoly clicked into place when Catherine's grandfather acquired Draycott Estate in Wiltshire through his advantageous marriage, creating a three-county power base that established the Tylney Longs as provincial royalty, without the inconvenience of actually being related to the king. Into this dynasty of ambitious wealth compilers, Catherine arrived on October 2nd, 1789, the product of Sir James Tylney Long and Lady Catherine Windsor, one bringing commercial fortune, the other aristocratic connections and the subtle snobbery that accompanied ancient bloodlines. Sir James, who married fashionably late at 49, unconventionally designated his daughters as potential heirs, either from progressive ideals or the pragmatic recognition that without such provisions his carefully accumulated properties might scatter to male relatives bearing disappointingly different surnames. The Tylney Longs occupied that awkward middle tier of Georgian society where ancient nobles considered them insufficiently blue-blooded for genuine acceptance, yet found them adequately funded for generous loans, convenient marriages and expensive dinner invitations. During childhood, Catherine rotated between magnificent properties that would make modern billionaires question their real estate portfolios, wintering at Wanstead House, where she observed the gilded machinery of wealth from within its ornate gears and springs. Unlike many contemporaries who believed female education should focus exclusively on embroidery and strategic feinting, Catherine's father provided instruction in estate management, knowledge ultimately insufficient against the specialised financial demolition talents her future husband would deploy. She inherited the Windsor family's renowned beauty without their tendency toward monarchy-threatening mental instability, developing into a young woman whose natural attractions would be considerably magnified when viewed through the lens of her bank accounts. Catherine's formative years unfolded against the dramatic backdrop of revolutionary France, her family committed to defeating Napoleon partly from patriotic fervour, but equally from the uncomfortable awareness that revolutionary movements typically redistributed exactly the type of concentrated multi-generational wealth they had accumulated. Her mother's aristocratic lineage stretched back to the Norman conquest, when ancestral Normans arrived with William the Conqueror to conduct history's most successful home invasion, proving that property seizure becomes perfectly acceptable provided it occurred sufficiently long ago and involved impressively pointed helmets. Tragedy accelerated Catherine's financial ascent when her brother James died in 1805, just before his 11th birthday, transforming her overnight from merely privileged adolescent to Britain's most desirable heiress, and inadvertently placing a target on her fortune visible from every debt-ridden country estate in England. This sudden inheritance catapulted Catherine into an extraordinarily vulnerable position. Simultaneously, England's most eligible and endangered young woman, her vast fortune attracting precisely the type of man most likely to convert ancestral wealth into ancestral debt. Through alchemical gifts, even Catherine's shrewd forebears could never have anticipated. When James's death transformed Catherine into Britain's premium matrimonial prize, she became London's first human financial instrument, a walking, breathing bank that could be acquired through nothing more complicated than successful courtship and an impressive ability to say "I do" with convincing sincerity. News of her inheritance rocketed through aristocratic circles with lightning speed, attracting social climbers whose sudden devoted interest in the previously unremarkable Miss Tylney Long revealed the precise exchange rate between sincere friendship and £30 million. Her guardians wisely sequestered young Catherine until her 20th year, when they deployed her onto the marriage market at a spectacular Grosvenor Square ball, unleashing an heiress so valuable that London's most prestigious ballrooms required crowd control measures previously reserved for royal appearances. Her debut season featured romantic contestants ranging from ancient dukes offering impressive titles attached to spectacularly mortgaged estates, to military heroes fresh from Napoleonic battlefields, who hoped to transfer their tactical brilliance from warfare to wealth acquisition. The amphibian-like Duke of Clarence pursued her with royal determination, evidently believing his eventual throne outweighed his unfortunate face, catastrophic finances, and 10 inconvenient children produced with actress Dorothy Jordan, a romantic resume that prompted Catherine's historic royal rejection. Her initial navigation through these treacherous social waters displayed remarkable judgment, avoiding impulsive attachments and evaluating suitors with impressive discernment. Traits that would mysteriously evaporate when William Pole Wellesley deployed his specialised courtship artillery. William approached Catherine as a military objective, distinguishing himself through calculated indifference toward her wealth, while simultaneously bombarding her with attention, wit, and vulnerability, a strategy that precisely targeted her inexperienced heart while neatly circumventing her guardian's suspicions. Their courtship exemplified romantic warfare at its most sophisticated, with William correctly identifying Catherine's emotional innocence as her primary vulnerability, a target considerably easier to breach than the legal fortifications surrounding her inheritance. On March 14, 1812, Catherine processed toward matrimonial surrender at St James's Church, adorned in Brussels lace and diamonds, her 21-year-old heart convinced of authentic love, while London society discreetly placed wagers on her fortune's expected lifespan. The marriage's early phase featured convincing theatrical performances of domestic bliss as Catherine produced 3 children, William, James and Victoria, while her husband redirected her fortune into his financial sinkholes with architectural precision. As Catherine busied herself with motherhood, William's mask gradually slipped to reveal his authentic character, less Prince Charming and more wealth-seeking missile with expensive tastes, combining financial exploitation with emotional warfare in a lesson of systematic destruction. By 1822, he had burned through her fortune with such extraordinary efficiency that he engineered an appointment as gentleman usher to King George IV, specifically to obtain immunity from arrest for debt, essentially gaining diplomatic protection from his own financial crimes. Catherine's humiliation culminated around 1823 when William installed Mistress Helena Patterson Bligh in their Naples residence, dispensing with traditional discretion and forcing his wife to cohabit with her replacement in a domestic arrangement that would have shocked even the morally flexible Regency aristocracy. Private correspondence reveals William's final gift to Catherine, a venereal disease that added physical suffering to her emotional devastation and potentially established the medical foundation for her premature death. Against overwhelming social pressure and legal obstacles, Catherine finally summoned remarkable courage to escape her gilded prison, returning to England with her children, initiating legal separation, and securing court protection for her children through actions requiring more genuine bravery in 1825 than leading a cavalry charge into enemy fire. By September 1825, 35-year-old Catherine had established a modest sanctuary in Richmond with her children and sisters, her once astronomical fortune contracted to £11,000 annually, a sum most English families would consider princely, but that barely covered what William once spent on waistcoats and wine. Enraged that his living treasury had developed legal defences, William publicly threatened to use stratagem if legitimate methods failed to secure custody of the children, essentially announcing his willingness to kidnap his own offspring primarily to access whatever inheritance might remain attached to them. On September 7th, while resting in Richmond, Catherine collapsed with violent abdominal spasms that transformed physicians' concern into alarm, prompting her to summon Sister Dora for an urgent revision of legal documents previously signed under William's coercion. The Duke of Wellington, displaying greater concern for his nephew's wife than his actual nephew ever managed, dispatched royal physician Sir Henry Halford to Catherine's bedside, suggesting both the severity of her condition and Wellington's accurate assessment of his relative as a human catastrophe. A cruelly misleading recovery appeared on September 9th, when Catherine briefly walked outdoors, a temporary remission echoing the deceptive early promise of her marriage, with equally heartbreaking ultimate consequences. This fragile improvement shattered on September 11th, when she suffered a catastrophic relapse, experiencing what witnesses described as agonies of the heart, accompanied by hysterical screaming. Reactions medical historians attribute either to cardiac distress or the entirely reasonable response to further communication from William. Despite physical suffering that would have rendered most patients incoherent, Catherine maintained remarkable clarity regarding her children's future, her maternal determination transcending physical collapse, with the same courage that had finally allowed her to challenge her husband's authority. On September 12th, 1825, Catherine died at 11 o'clock, surrounded by sisters and physicians, but mercifully not by the husband, who had systematically dismantled her fortune, health, and happiness with the efficiency of someone pursuing his life's true purpose. Contemporary witnesses testified that correspondence from William, arriving that morning, triggered her final seizure, delivering the ultimate emotional blow to her weakened system, and creating history's clearest case of death by poorly timed letter. Medical evidence suggests her death resulted from a perfect storm of conditions: inflammation of the bowels potentially exacerbated by venereal disease acquired from her husband's extracurricular activities, combining with extreme emotional distress to create a literally broken heart. London newspapers announced her death on September 13th, with barely concealed accusations against William. The Evening Herald, observing that, to her, riches have been worse than poverty, her heart ultimately broken through the very means that should have cherished her. Thousands lined the funeral route to Draycott Church, their presence representing Britain's collective judgment against William, a public verdict delivered through respectful silence, rather than the social media outrage that would accompany similar situations today. Catherine's death catalysed legal history when Lord Chancellor Eldon ruled William should become England's first father, denied custody based on moral character. A decision so revolutionary in patriarchal Georgian society that it effectively created modern family law's foundational precedent. Her sisters Dorothy and Emma fulfilled Catherine's dying wish by raising her 3 children beyond William's reach, protecting them from a man whose paternal interest directly corresponded to their financial prospects and nothing more. William's subsequent life unfolded with predictable disaster, marrying his mistress Helena in 1828, continuing to accumulate debts despite dramatically reduced income, and eventually dying while eating a boiled egg in 1857. His final years spent in the poverty he so richly deserved, but Catherine never did. Catherine Tylney Long's tragic story reminds us that great wealth can attract the wrong kind of attention, her vast fortune becoming both the source of her power and ultimately her downfall. What began as a fairy tale romance with William Wellesley Pole quickly descended into a cautionary tale of financial predation, emotional abuse, and heartbreak. Her life stands as a poignant reminder that even in an age obsessed with advantageous marriages, some prices for love prove far too high. Power comes in many forms. There's the raw power of wealth, the kind that built America's railroads and forged its industrial empire. Then there's the subtler power of social change, the kind that reshapes societies from within. Mary Harriman Rumsey wielded both. Born into one of America's greatest fortunes, she could have lived a life of idle luxury. Instead, she chose to challenge the very system that created her privilege. Her journey from railroad princess to progressive champion would help reshape American society. until fate intervened in the most aristocratic way imaginable. In today's episode, I'll share the story of a woman who dared to transform inherited privilege into a force for social progress, only to pass by the most tragically wealthy of means. The progressive Gilded Age heiress who tragically died on horseback. The tale of Mary Harriman Rumsey. In the waning days of America's Gilded Age, where fortunes were built on steel rails and measured in miles of track, Mary Harriman emerged not as another idle heiress, but as a woman determined to reshape the meaning of privilege itself. Born on the 17th of November 1881, she grew up in the shadow of one of the most powerful men in American history. Her father, E.H. Harriman, the railroad titan who transformed the Union Pacific from a bankrupt liability into an empire of steel and steam. The grounds of Arden House, the family estate nestled in New York's Ramapo Mountains, became Mary's earliest classroom. While her father's railroads stretched across the continent, the estate itself grew to encompass 20,000 acres of carefully preserved wilderness, a symbol of the family's complex relationship with power and responsibility. Here, among the pristine forests and commanding views of the Hudson, Mary developed a worldview that would later challenge the very foundations of her privileged upbringing. Unlike many of her contemporaries, who viewed their position in society purely as a platform for social advancement, Mary found herself drawn to the progressive movements brewing beneath the gilded surface of American society. The contrast between Arden's manicured gardens and the harsh realities of industrial-age America sparked something in the young woman that would later ignite into purpose. Her mother, Mary Williamson Averill Harriman, provided a powerful example of how wealth could be wielded for social good. The elder Mary, who would inherit E.H. Harriman's vast fortune estimated between $70 and $100 million upon his death in 1909, demonstrated that financial power could serve as a tool for positive change rather than mere self-indulgence. The young Mary's early life was marked by an unusual combination of privilege and purpose. While other debutantes focused solely on their social calendars, she found herself increasingly drawn to the emerging social sciences, particularly the field of sociology. This interest would later prove to be more than just a passing fancy of a wealthy young woman. It was the foundation of a life's mission. But it was through her involvement with the Junior League of New York that Mary first began to transform her progressive ideals into action. The organization, comprised of young women from prominent families, worked to improve conditions in settlement houses and advocate for social reforms. Under Mary's influence, what could have been merely a social club for wealthy women began to evolve into something far more potent. As the new century dawned and America entered a period of unprecedented social change, Mary stood at a crossroads. The death of her father in September 1909 marked not just the end of a railroad empire's first chapter, but the beginning of a new kind of influence that neither Wall Street nor New York society quite understood. While her mother took control of the vast Harriman fortune, Mary began to forge her own path, one that would lead her far from the expected role of a railroad baron's daughter. In the winter of 1910, she made a decision that would ripple through American society for decades to come. As she stood before the gates of Arden, watching snow blanket the Hudson Valley below, the 28-year-old heiress was preparing to unleash a new kind of power, one that would transform not just her own life, but the lives of countless others. As the 1910s dawned, Mary Harriman charted a course that diverged sharply from the expected path of a railroad baron's daughter. While her peers focused on maintaining social standing through elaborate parties and carefully arranged marriages, Mary sought to leverage her position for broader social impact. Her family name opened doors, but it was her determination that would ultimately define her legacy. The year 1910 marked a pivotal moment in Mary's life when she married Charles Carey Rumsey, a talented sculptor whose artistic vision complemented her pragmatic approach to social reform. The union raised eyebrows among New York's elite. A railroad heiress marrying an artist seemed almost revolutionary in those stratified times. The marriage proved to be a partnership that would strengthen both their individual pursuits. Their family grew quickly with the arrival of Charles Carey Rumsey Jr. in 1911, followed by Mary Averill Rumsey in 1913 and Bronson Harriman Rumsey in 1917. Motherhood, rather than distracting Mary from her social consciousness, seemed to sharpen it. The contrast between her children's privileged upbringing and the harsh realities faced by less fortunate families in New York City only intensified her drive to effect change. While her mother, Mary Williamson Averill Harriman, managed the vast family fortune and supported various causes, including the controversial Eugenics Record Office, the younger Mary focused her energies on direct engagement with progressive reform movements. She understood that her generation faced unique challenges that couldn't be solved through traditional philanthropy alone. The Junior League of New York became her primary vehicle for action during these years. Under her influence, the organization evolved beyond its origins as a social club for debutantes into a serious force for social change. Mary helped redirect the energy and resources of young society women toward meaningful community service and advocacy for social reforms. As World War I erupted in Europe, Mary found new outlets for her organizational abilities through her work with the Council for National Defense. The crisis demanded a different kind of leadership, one that could mobilize resources and coordinate efforts across traditional social boundaries. Mary's experience with the Junior League had prepared her well for this expanded role in public service. Throughout these years, she maintained a careful balance between her public works and private life. The Rumsey household, while certainly comfortable, avoided the ostentatious displays common among New York's elite. Instead, Mary focused on instilling in her children the same sense of social responsibility that drove her own actions. But as the war years drew to a close, Mary began to envision a broader role for herself in American public life. The experience of coordinating wartime efforts had given her valuable insights into the mechanisms of social change at a national level. In the quiet moments between her many responsibilities, she began formulating plans that would soon carry her far beyond the traditional constraints of her social class. As 1919 approached, Mary stood poised on the brink of her most significant contribution to American society. The skills she had honed through years of progressive activism, combined with her unique position at the intersection of wealth and social reform, were about to find their most powerful expression yet. In a modest office in Washington, D.C., far from the marble halls of New York society, the next chapter of her remarkable journey was about to begin. The 1920s brought seismic shifts to American society, and Mary Harriman Rumsey positioned herself at the center of this transformation. While many of her social peers retreated into the hedonistic embrace of the Jazz Age, Mary's focus remained steadfastly on social progress. Her work with the Junior League had evolved into a national movement, expanding from its New York roots to establish chapters across the country. But it was the stock market crash of 1929 that truly catalyzed Mary's most significant contributions to American society. As the nation reeled from economic catastrophe, she emerged as an unexpected bridge between the worlds of wealth and progressive reform. Her unique position, understanding both the mechanics of high finance through her family background and the realities of social needs through her reform work, made her an invaluable asset during a time of unprecedented economic crisis. Franklin D. Roosevelt, who had known Mary through New York social circles, recognized in her a rare combination of practical experience and progressive vision. In 1933, she accepted his appointment to chair the Consumer Advisory Board of the National Recovery Administration. The appointment marked a significant milestone. Few women held such positions of authority within the new administration, and none came from such a prominent background. The Consumer Advisory Board, under her leadership, tackled the complex challenge of balancing economic recovery with consumer protection. Mary approached her role with characteristic thoroughness, often working long hours to understand the intricate details of industrial codes and their impact on ordinary Americans. Her background as both a Harriman and a social reformer gave her unique insights into the delicate balance between business interests and public good. Frances Perkins, Roosevelt's Secretary of Labor and the first woman to serve in a presidential cabinet, found common ground with Mary in their shared vision for economic justice. Their collaboration helped ensure that consumer interests weren't overlooked in the ambitious restructuring of the American economy. Mary's ability to navigate between different social spheres, from boardrooms to government offices, proved invaluable in building consensus for reform measures. Throughout 1934, Mary maintained a demanding schedule that divided her time between Washington and her other commitments. Her children, Charles Jr., 23, Mary Averill, 21, and Bronson, 17, witnessed their mother's dedication to public service, even as she remained devoted to her family responsibilities. The balancing act was challenging, but Mary approached it with the same determination that characterized all her endeavors. The autumn of 1934 found Mary deeply engaged in her work with the Consumer Advisory Board, while still pursuing her passion for horseback riding near her country home in Virginia. The rolling hills of Middleburg provided a welcome respite from the pressures of Washington, allowing her to indulge in the equestrian activities she had loved since childhood. As November turned to December, she continued to split her time between her government responsibilities and these cherished moments of recreation. As winter approached, Mary was at the height of her influence in Washington, respected across political lines for her practical approach to economic reform. The Consumer Advisory Board, under her leadership, had become an essential voice in the ongoing national recovery effort. But fate was about to intervene in a way that would transform her legacy from that of an active participant in the New Deal to a symbol of its early idealism. On a late autumn morning in Middleburg, Virginia, Mary mounted her horse for what would prove to be her final ride. The events that followed would cut short a remarkable career in public service and leave Roosevelt's administration without one of its most capable leaders at a crucial moment in the New Deal's evolution. In November 1934, the rolling hills of Middleburg, Virginia, echoed with the traditional sounds of fox hunting season. For Mary Harriman Rumsey, these hunts represented more than just sport. They were a connection to the aristocratic traditions she had both inherited and sought to reform through her public service. That autumn morning, as she joined the hunt on her Virginia farm, there was no indication that this familiar ritual would lead to tragedy. The fox hunt proceeded as normal until Mary's horse stumbled, throwing her to the ground with devastating force. The impact left her severely injured, and the woman who had helped shape the New Deal's early years now lay wounded on the same Virginia soil where she had so often found joy and respite from her demanding work in Washington. The news of her accident reverberated through the capital's corridors of power. As she fought for recovery in the weeks that followed, a steady stream of visitors made their way to her bedside. Cabinet members, reform advocates, and family friends all came to pay their respects to the woman who had bridged so many worlds, from the heights of industrial wealth to the trenches of social reform. Initially, there was hope for recovery. Mary had always possessed a remarkable resilience, demonstrated throughout her life as she transformed from railroad heiress to progressive reformer. But as November turned to December, a new enemy emerged in her battle for survival. Pneumonia, a common and dangerous complication for bedridden patients in the era before antibiotics, began to take hold. During those December days, as Mary lay incapacitated, the work of the Consumer Advisory Board continued, though her absence was keenly felt. The organisation she had led with such dedication now served as a testament to her ability to build lasting institutions. Her colleagues carried on her work, even as they anxiously monitored reports of her condition. The cruel irony of her situation was not lost on those who knew her story. 12 years earlier, in September 1922, she had lost her husband, Charles Carey Rumsey, in a car accident. Now she faced her own mortality, leaving her 3 children, Charles Jr., Mary Averill and Bronson, to contemplate a future without either parent. On the 18th of December 1934, Mary Harriman Rumsey succumbed to pneumonia, her body unable to overcome the combined challenges of her injuries and infection. At 53 years and 1 month old, she had lived a life that defied the conventions of her class and era, yet died in a manner that eerily reflected the aristocratic traditions she had worked to reform. The timing of her death, coming at a crucial juncture in the New Deal's evolution, left many wondering how different the programme's implementation might have been had she lived. Her unique ability to understand both the concerns of business and the needs of consumers had made her an invaluable voice in policy discussions. As winter descended on Middleburg, the farm where she had taken her final ride stood as a quiet reminder of how quickly fate can alter the course of history. The woman who had worked so tirelessly to reshape America's economic landscape had been struck down not by political opposition or the exhaustion of her demanding schedule, but by the cruel twist of fate during a traditional fox hunt. In Washington, as her colleagues prepared for the challenges ahead without her leadership, a question lingered in the minds of many. How would her absence affect the delicate balance she had helped maintain between recovery and reform? The answer would soon become apparent as the New Deal entered its next crucial phase. The death of Mary Harriman Rumsey in December 1934 marked the end of a remarkable transformation, from railroad heiress to progressive reformer. Her passing came at a crucial moment in the New Deal's evolution, just as her work with the Consumer Advisory Board was beginning to shape the relationship between government, business, and the American consumer. Her legacy lived on through her three children, Charles Harriman Rumsey, Mary Avril Rumsey, and Bronson Harriman Rumsey. While their mother's time in public service had been brief, spanning just the crucial years of 1933 and 1934, her impact on the early New Deal programs demonstrated how wealth and social consciousness could work in tandem for the public good. The Junior League stood as perhaps her most enduring achievement. What began as a social organisation for debutantes had evolved, under her guidance, into a nationwide network dedicated to community service and social reform. This transformation reflected Mary's own journey from privilege to purpose, showing how traditional social institutions could be redirected toward progressive ends. As chair of the Consumer Advisory Board of the National Recovery Administration, she had brought a unique perspective to the challenges of economic recovery. Her background in both the world of industrial wealth and progressive reform allowed her to navigate the competing interests of business and consumers during a critical period of American history. Her death from complications following a riding accident came just as she was establishing herself in this new role. The timing was particularly poignant. Having found her voice in public service, she was struck down before she could fully realize her potential as a reformer. The woman who had worked to bridge the gap between America's industrial past and its progressive future would not live to see how this transformation played out. The Consumer Advisory Board continued its work after her passing, though without the unique perspective she had brought to its deliberations. As one of the few women in a leadership position during the early New Deal, she had helped demonstrate that gender need not be a barrier to effective public service, even if her time in office was cut tragically short. Looking back at the brief span between her appointment in 1933 and her death in 1934, we can see the outlines of what might have been. In just 18 months, she had begun to reshape how government approached consumer interests during economic recovery, bringing both practical knowledge and progressive ideals to bear on pressing national issues. The Virginia countryside, where she took her final ride, served as a powerful symbol of the two worlds she inhabited, the traditional aristocracy of her birth and the progressive future she worked to create. Her death during a recreational pursuit common to her social class, even as she worked to reform the economic system that had created that class, captured the complexities of her position in American society. Her story ultimately transcended the circumstances of her death, speaking to larger questions about privilege, responsibility, and the possibility of personal transformation. In her journey from railroad heiress to New Deal reformer, Mary Harriman Rumsey had demonstrated how inherited advantage could be redirected toward public service, even if her own opportunity to pursue this path was cut tragically short. When you inherit billions from one of America's wealthiest families, you'd expect that money to provide security, freedom, and happiness for the rest of your life. Madeline Astor discovered that some fortunes come with conditions so restrictive they transform wealth into a prison, forcing impossible choices between love and money that would ultimately destroy everything she held dear. Her story represents the dark side of inherited wealth, where legal clauses designed to protect family assets become weapons that punish the very people they're meant to benefit. From surviving history's most famous maritime disaster to becoming America's youngest billionaire widow, Madeline's journey seemed destined for a fairy tale ending. Instead, she would learn that the Astor family fortune carried a price tag that demanded she sacrifice her personal happiness to maintain her financial security. Her tragic descent from unimaginable privilege to devastating poverty proves that sometimes the most expensive inheritance is the one that costs you everything else worth having. Therefore, in today's episode of Old Money Allure, we examine how Madeline Astor's billion-dollar inheritance became her ultimate downfall. Some love stories begin with scandal, but few achieve the spectacular level of public outrage that greeted 18-year-old Madeline Force's engagement to 47-year-old Colonel John Jacob Astor IV in 1911. Born on June 19, 1893, in Brooklyn, Madeline Talmadge Force grew up in a well-to-do but not aristocratic family that owned a successful shipping company and moved in respectable New York social circles. Her father, William Hurlbut Force, was prosperous enough to send Madeline and her sister Catherine to prestigious schools like Miss Spence's in Manhattan, where Madeline was noted as a brilliant pupil who travelled frequently to Europe. The Force family spent summers in Bar Harbor, Maine, where wealthy Americans gathered to escape the heat. And it was here in 1910 that 17-year-old Madeline met her destiny in the form of one of America's richest men. Colonel John Jacob Astor IV was worth an estimated $87 to $150 million, roughly 2.4 to 4.1 billion in today's currency, making him not just wealthy but genuinely one of the world's richest individuals. But Astor came with serious baggage that made him a deeply problematic romantic prospect. He had just endured a scandalous divorce from Ava Lowell Willing in 1909 after 18 years of marriage. Divorce was still considered social suicide in 1910, especially for a man of Astor's prominence, and his ex-wife had received a settlement of about $10 million, making their split one of the most expensive in American history. The 29-year age gap between Madeline and Astor provided endless ammunition for newspaper cartoonists who lampooned them as Papa and the Baby, while high society reacted with the kind of moral horror usually reserved for actual crimes. When their engagement was announced in August 1911, the public reaction was so venomous that Madeline reportedly collapsed from the stress of constant media scrutiny and had to retreat from public appearances. Finding a minister willing to perform the ceremony became a genuine challenge, as several Episcopal priests refused to officiate due to Astor's divorced status and the scandalous nature of the match. Eventually, a Congregationalist minister named Reverend Joseph Lambert agreed to perform the ceremony, reportedly for a fee of $2,000, approximately $56,000 in today's money, though he resigned from his church shortly after due to public backlash. The wedding took place on September 9, 1911, at Beechwood, Astor's Newport mansion, with Vincent Astor serving as his father's best man, despite the family tensions surrounding the marriage. Even Astor's own mother stayed away from the ceremony, and New York society largely shunned the couple, forcing them to flee to Europe immediately after the wedding to escape the relentless gossip and criticism. The Cincinnati Enquirer called their union a marriage of questionable morality, while rumours circulated that Madeline's family had been paid off to consent to the match, adding financial scandal to the moral outrage. But Madeline had achieved something extraordinary. She had married one of the world's richest men and gained access to a fortune that would make her one of the most powerful women in America, if she could survive the social consequences. What she couldn't know was that her triumph would be short-lived, and that history's most famous maritime disaster was already steaming toward an iceberg in the North Atlantic, carrying her husband to his death and her to a widowhood that would define the rest of her life. To escape the scandal surrounding their marriage, the newlyweds embarked on an extended honeymoon that would take them from luxury to tragedy in less than a year. The couple first sailed to Europe on the RMS Olympic, the Titanic's sister ship, before travelling to Egypt and Paris, where they lived as international celebrities while American society gossiped about their marriage. By early 1912, Madeline was 5 months pregnant, and the couple decided to return to New York for the birth, booking first-class passage on the maiden voyage of the most luxurious ship ever built. They boarded the RMS Titanic in Cherbourg, France, on April 10, 1912, with their full entourage. Astor's valet, Victor Robbins, Madeline's maid, Rosalie Bidois, her private nurse, Caroline Andres, and their beloved Airedale terrier named Kitty. Their parlour suite was one of the most luxurious accommodations on the ship, costing $4,350, approximately $50,000 in today's currency, for a journey that was supposed to mark their triumphant return to America. On the night of April 14, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg, and Astor initially reassured his pregnant wife that the damage was minor, trying to keep her calm as the situation deteriorated. As the reality of the disaster became clear, Madeline demonstrated remarkable compassion by lending her fur shawl to third-class passenger Leah Axe to keep her young son warm, a gesture that newspapers would later hail as proof of her true nobility. The couple retreated to the first-class gymnasium, where they sat on mechanical horses while wearing life jackets, with Astor even cutting open a spare life jacket with his penknife to show Madeline its contents and calm her fears. When it came time to evacuate, Madeline, her maid and nurse were assisted through a first-class promenade window to board Lifeboat 4, which had been lowered to the A-deck to take on more passengers. Astor asked Second Officer Charles Lightoller for permission to join his pregnant wife in the lifeboat, citing her delicate condition, but was denied due to the Women and Children First protocol that was being strictly enforced. With remarkable composure for a man facing death, Astor calmly promised to meet Madeline later, saying, "The sea is calm, and you will be all right," giving her what would be their final kiss. Madeline's lifeboat was lowered at 1:55 a.m. with room for at least 15 more people, a haunting detail that would trouble survivors for the rest of their lives. John Jacob Astor IV died when the Titanic sank on April 15, 1912, and his body was recovered on April 22 by the cable ship Mackay Bennett, identified by his initials and a gold watch. When his body was found, he was carrying $2,440 in cash and diamond cufflinks, creating endless speculation about hidden jewels and the fortune that had gone down with the ship. Madeline was rescued by the RMS Carpathia and arrived in New York on April 18th, devastated and wearing only the clothes from that terrible night, transformed overnight from scandalous young bride to tragic teenage widow. At just 18 years old, she had become what newspapers called the richest girl who couldn't vote, inheriting a massive fortune that came with conditions that would ultimately destroy her future happiness. But Madeline's real tragedy wasn't losing her husband in the world's most famous maritime disaster. It was about to discover that the Astor family had built legal traps into his will that would force her to choose between love and money for the rest of her life. When John Jacob Astor IV's will was read, Madeline discovered she had inherited a fortune that came with conditions so restrictive they would turn her wealth into a prison for the rest of her life. From Astor's $85 million estate, approximately $2.8 billion in today's currency, Madeline received what appeared to be an incredibly generous inheritance that made her one of the wealthiest women in America. She inherited $100,000 outright, the annual income from a $5 million trust fund, an additional $500,000 annually, and the use of the magnificent Astor Fifth Avenue mansion at 65th Street. The inheritance also included the Newport mansion Beechwood with all its furnishings, a luxury limousine of her choice, 5 prized horses, and essentially everything needed to maintain the lifestyle of America's richest widow. But buried in the legal language was a clause that would prove to be the most expensive condition in inheritance history. If Madeline remarried, she would forfeit the trust fund income and lose the use of all Astor properties. This wasn't just about money, it was about control, as the Astor family lawyers had designed the will to keep Astor assets within the bloodline and deter fortune hunters from pursuing the teenage widow. For 4 years, Madeline lived as the world's wealthiest teenager who couldn't vote, controlling more liquid income than many robber barons' widows, but unable to sign large contracts without a male trustee's approval. She gave birth to the Titanic baby, John Jacob Astor VI, on August 14, 1912, raising him quietly at Beechwood while hosting small charitable events and living under constant media scrutiny. But in 1916, Madeline made the decision that would destroy her financial security forever. She chose love over money by marrying her childhood friend William Carl Dick, a banker and sugar refinery heir. William Carl Dick was wealthy but not Astor rich, and while he could provide a comfortable life, he couldn't replace the massive income stream that Madeline was about to sacrifice for their marriage. The moment Madeline said "I do" to Dick in Bar Harbor, Maine, she instantly relinquished the $5 million trust fund income and lost the use of both Astor mansions, which reverted to her stepson Vincent under the will's terms. This meant that her decision to remarry cost her the equivalent of approximately $160 million in today's currency, plus the use of properties worth tens of millions more, making it one of the most expensive wedding vows in history. While she retained the $100,000 cash legacy and some personal assets like horses and motor cars, the loss of the trust fund income meant she could no longer maintain anything approaching her previous lifestyle. Madeline and Dick moved to a more modest Long Island estate and had 2 sons, William Force Dick and John Henry Dick II. But the marriage lasted only 17 years before ending in divorce in Reno, Nevada in 1933. Just months after her divorce from Dick, Madeline shocked society again by marrying Enzo Fiamonte, an Italian prizefighter and actor who was 26 years old and had a wife and child in Italy. This marriage was considered so scandalous that Madeline was dropped from the social register, the directory of America's elite, completing her fall from the heights of New York society to social exile. But Madeline's financial troubles were just beginning, as her new husband would prove to be not just socially unacceptable, but personally dangerous in ways that would threaten both her remaining money and her physical safety. Madeline's marriage to Enzo Fiamonte in 1933 marked the beginning of the most devastating chapter of her life, as her Italian boxer husband turned out to be both financially parasitic and physically violent. Fiamonte had expected continuous cash infusions from his wealthy American wife, but when Madeline couldn't provide the lavish funding he demanded, he responded with the kind of brutality that would have shocked even hardened boxing fans. According to court testimony during their 1938 divorce proceedings, Fiamonte broke Madeline's wrist and ribs during violent quarrels, transforming the woman who had once been America's most sympathetic widow into a battered wife living in fear. The physical abuse was accompanied by financial devastation, as Fiamonte burned through Madeline's remaining assets with spectacular efficiency, spending her money on cars, racehorses and jewellery while contributing nothing to their household. When Madeline finally divorced Fiamonte in 1938 for extreme cruelty, the legal fees, hush money to prevent him from selling tell-all stories to tabloids, and his extravagant spending had rapidly depleted what remained of her non-Astor fortune. After their divorce, Fiamonte demonstrated his complete lack of class by selling a serialized tell-all story titled "I Married the Titanic Widow" to True Story magazine, earning more money from exploiting their marriage than Madeline received in yearly alimony. By this point, Madeline had lost not just her Astor inheritance, but also most of her personal wealth, forcing her to retreat to her last remaining asset, a small house in Palm Beach, Florida, that she had purchased in her own name. The woman who had once controlled an income equivalent to tens of millions of dollars annually was now living modestly in Florida, far removed from the Fifth Avenue mansion where she had once entertained New York's elite. Madeline spent her final years as a lonely figure in Palm Beach society, occasionally hosting illegal backroom baccarat games during ladies' afternoons to help pay expenses, a far cry from her days as America's wealthiest widow. Her health had been compromised by years of stress, trauma from the Titanic disaster, and the physical abuse she had suffered during her marriage to Fiamonte, leading to increasing reliance on prescription medications. On March 27, 1940, a maid found Madeline unresponsive in her Palm Beach home amid half-empty sedative bottles, leading to speculation about whether her death was accidental or intentional. While Manhattan newspapers reported sudden heart seizure as the official cause of death, gossip columns suggested a possible overdose, reflecting the tragic end of a life that had been marked by both extraordinary privilege and devastating loss. Estate filings revealed that Madeline died with less than $90,000 in liquid assets, a pittance compared to the fortune she had once controlled as the teenage widow of John Jacob Astor IV. The Fifth Avenue mansion where she had once lived in splendor now belonged to her stepson Vincent Astor, who ordered its demolition the same year she died to build a luxury apartment building, erasing even the physical reminder of her former life. Meanwhile, her son John Jacob Astor VI, the Titanic baby, spent 2 decades suing Vincent for a larger share of the family fortune, ultimately settling for just $250,000, barely 1% of the Astor wealth. Madeline's story serves as the ultimate cautionary tale about the hidden costs of inheriting wealth with conditions, proving that sometimes the price of choosing love over money is everything you once had and everything you might have been. The woman who had survived the Titanic disaster, endured public scandal, and rebuilt her life multiple times, ultimately could not survive the financial and emotional devastation of her own choices, dying alone and nearly penniless at just 46 years old.